Hi folks, this is Agnes and this is your Illustrator crash course. Now, we have some very important bits of equipment to talk about. First of all, there's your mouse. It has two buttons. There's a click and there's a right click. I will be showing you what I'm doing with my mouse while I'm actually showing you pieces of Illustrator so that you can see what I'm talking about when I say a click and drag versus a click or a right click. The other part of Illustrator that you need to know is that it is much like a manual car with an actual, human controlled transmission. It requires both hands. So the other hand you should have near this part of the keyboard. A lot of the keyboard shortcuts that allow you to work fast in Illustrator will be on this side. I know that these buttons don't look the same because you guys are working on Macs, but your shift key is going to be the same. Your control is in the same space, and your alt key, even though it doesn't say alt on it, it will be in the same space. So these three keys, as well as the caps lock, are all going to be in the same place. The other keyboard shortcuts that I tend to use are V and A to switch between certain tools, and those are also fun to use. Spacebar is another one. So as I'm going through Illustrator, you're going to be able to see what I'm doing on the keyboard and with my mouse. Okay, so to open up Illustrator, you double click on it in your dock. If it's not there, you have to go to your desktop or into your programs. The Finder, it's the little dude with the smiley face, and open up Illustrator. Once you have Illustrator opened, we can start with a new file. I always use the shortcut. You can always use the new file option. I like the shortcut with letter. This is an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper that is a default setting on most printers. So it's fun to use when you know you're going to be printing something at home. I'm going to click on it and hope that my computer doesn't crash. Okay, now the first thing to note is that Illustrator has a whole bunch of very intimidating boxes. Please don't be intimidated by those. They're pretty well named and they have a pretty good and flexible organization. Now I have some presets that I like to work with that pop up automatically when I use Illustrator. You might not see any of this at all. In fact, you might see only this when you open up Illustrator. If this is what you're seeing, don't freak out, not to worry. This is just the default setting for the Essentials workspace. It's got very little space in here and it's mostly for presentations. To change, you're going to first visit the drop-down menus. You'll notice that the drop-down menus are here at the top. You have the Illustrator icon, your home menu. So if you click on that, it'll take you to that home screen. If you want to get out of that home screen and into the file that you were in, you hit the back button. Awesome. You have your file menu. If you click once on the file menu, you can see all of these different options for such as new, open, save, version history, save as a template, place, export, script, document setup, file, print, and exit. These are mostly excuse me, file related commands. Your edit menu has your copies and pastes, your font, and where you want to paste it. Paste in front puts it on the top layer, paste in back puts it in the back layer, paste in place essentially copies the object and its location. So if you're working on multiple artboards, you can place the same object in the exact same spot. And you can also use a keyboard shortcut that says paste on all artboards, which lets you paste that object on every artboard that you're working on. Speaking of artboards, this white square is your artboard. You know it's your artboard because it looks like a sheet of paper or a board. It can be very tiny or extremely huge, which is interesting and fun. Your object drop-down menu lets you do things like align, arrange, transform, and slice and adjust paths and shapes. This is a bit more of a high-level driving, so we're going to skip it for now. There's a type drop-down menu, which lets you control typography in the most basic way. You've got your select menu, which allows you to select, deselect, inverse, select next objects, same objects, etc. Effects actually kind of import from Photoshop. These do rasterize your objects, which means that you want to do that at the very end of your workflow because it will make moving things slow. And if your computer has motion issues like mine, it'll take a minute. Your view menu lets you zoom in, zoom out, and show and hide grids. I am going to show a grid for today just so that you can see what it looks like. And I'm also going to turn on my rulers. Rulers tell you what unit of measure you're using. Right now we are in points. I know that because 1 inch, so 1 square is 72 points. Your window menu is the one that you're going to love because this has essentially access to all the tools and all the little toolboxes and selection boxes that you want. You want 3D materials, you click on this, it opens up a 3D material palette. You want your color palette, you can turn this on. As long as there's a checkbox next to it, it is on. It also has this thing called workspaces. As you can see, we are now in Essentials. I'm going to move to Essentials Classic. If you are doing things for print, you'll notice that you have printing and proofing. You also have a specific tracing um, window, which lets you do live trace, for example. I'm going to go to Essentials Classic, and I highly recommend that you start with Essentials Classic as well. If you like this workspace, you can actually save it. Under Workspace, you can see that you can have a Reset Essentials Classic, a new workspace, or Manage Workspaces. So you can actually save these, and depending on the things that you like to work with in Illustrator, you can have those palettes pop up every time you open your file. Awesome. The next part of your Illustrator setup, if you are in the Essentials workspace, is going to be this bar over here. It's a strip, and it is a dynamic strip. Depending on the tool that you have, it will change what is displayed in it. Okay, so the pen tool options are going to be just a little different than, say, rectangle options. Okay. So this is a dynamic shortcuts menu. Think of it that way. On the left-hand side, you have your tools palette. The tools palette can be anchored and show up as 1 row. Oh, it can be expanded and show up as 2 rows. I have a wide screen, so I usually prefer 2 rows, but since I'm doing a half screen, I'm going to make it long and thin and skinny so we can see all the tools stacked on top of each other up and down. If you look at a tool and it has a little teeny tiny box on the side, if you use your middle finger to right click, you will see that this tool has submenus attached to it. For example, the line segment tool has an arc tool, spiral, a rectangle, and polar grid tool as well. If you look at the sharper tool, it has a pencil, smooth, path, and erasers, etc. Some of these are a lot of fun to play with. They don't make for really good design unless you can control yourself, because there's, the warp tool has it's fun to mess with things, but then they don't necessarily look good. You also have the free transform tool and the puppet warp tool, which are tools brought to you from Photoshop. So if you're more familiar with Photoshop, you might recognize some of these. Your gradient tools, and then your zoom tool is here at the bottom. So you don't have to use keyboard shortcuts. I prefer keyboard shortcuts, Control- to zoom out, Control+ to zoom in. For Macs, that would be Command. The button is pretty much in the same place. You can also use the Control-0 to bring your object to the center of the stage. And if you press the space bar, you'll notice that you get a hand tool. If you click, so I'm pressing down with my pointy finger on the mouse, and I'm dragging this around. This allows you to move your artboard around and see specific areas. This is very helpful if you're very zoomed in and you're working on details. Below it, you have a section that tells you about your colors, your fill, which is the white square here, and your stroke, which is the outline of your objects. Because these are vector graphics, they are kind of built as equations on a grid. Each equation will have the center, so the fill of the grid, and the stroke, which is the outline. By default, it is set to black and white, and anytime you want to get back to the default, you just hit this little icon here at the top. To mess with the fill, you can double click on this little white square. If you want to switch to, oops, sorry, I got to cancel that. If you want to switch to the stroke, you just click that. See how it's on top? Now you can change the color of the stroke. You also get a back, essentially what you've let your last 3 selections are here at the bottom, including a crossout. That means there is no color, it's transparent. A gradient, which is a transition from one color to another, and the last color that you used. Below it, you have some options for drawing modes. We're going to leave those alone for right now. And then changing the screen mode. This lets you present your work. On the opposite side, now I'm going to finish this very quickly, are your palettes. These are individual palettes that allow you to control aspects such as swatches. Each swatch has a color guide attached to it. So if I say select blue, I can go to the color guide and it gives me some palettes to work with by default. If you click on the drop-down menu, you'll notice that these palettes are based on your color wheel. So you have your analogous colors, triads, compound triads, high contrast, complementary swatch sets. So it essentially, if you pick a color, it will give you colors to work with on the color wheel. You have a color mixing palette. This allows you to kind of more organically pick colors. I highly recommend that once you pick a color and you find this really cool custom, say blue-green that you like, you click on this color here. And if you click and drag this, you can actually put this into your swatches so you don't have to worry about trying to recreate it in the color picker. Okay. Other menus that you can see down here is your brush menu. This allows you to change how the brushes look on the page, and I will demonstrate those in the next video. Another menu that is highly important is your layers menu. Illustrator and Photoshop both work with layers and allow you to stack things on top of each other, although they behave a little differently. And then you have your type menus with the paragraph and the character menu, which are important. The alignment menu is what makes the pro versus a noob, as my daughter likes to say. So don't be a noob, use your alignment. The transformation palette lets you look at an object, control where its center is, and what is its location on the X and Y axis, because the computer thinks of this as a grid with an x-axis going side to side, y-axis going up and down. And that my favorite Pathfinder palette, which allows you to create complex objects out of simple shapes. Okay, so those are important. The other ones don't worry about yet, not part of the crash course. We're going to pick up doing some basic work in the next video.